Welcome to How We Grow, an essential playbook to grow and scale your vacation rental business with advice and insights from the best in the biz, with your host, Lynell Gordon. If it's okay with you, I'd like to do a part 2 because I want to know the rest of your story. Okay, good. Okay, so we stopped at the place where you were like, you really started on ground level. Doing customer support is one of the best ways to learn a business, period. Hands down. So you started doing customer support, and then what happened?
So we did that for about 2 years or so, and I watched the company. I was the official lucky number 13th hire.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just wild in hindsight, it really is. And so we saw the company continue to grow, right? 200, 300, 400, 500 people. And so I eventually was managing a remote team of air crew, they called it, which I think Airbnb was ahead of the curve, right, in terms of bringing in this remote staff. And I give them a ton of credit too, because it wasn't, when you think of customer support now, you sort of think of this black box. You call this 1-800 number, someone on the other side of the world. Thank you for calling, and you have to do all this and that. And it's like, you never, I feel like people aren't happy when they have to call their bank customer support, their credit card, or whatever, Amazon or something like that, right? And Airbnb took the approach of saying, no, we're going to over-index on the support staff. We're going to hire people that were honestly wildly overqualified. You had entrepreneurs, you had people that started businesses, you had people that had gone to some like amazing college universities, right? That were doing amazing work, and they felt this connection to Airbnb and to the idea of being a host, right? And so we'd bring these people in, and I would interview a few at the time, and it was like, these are really smart, talented people that were often hosting very early on Airbnb. They had traveled the world, right? So they'd seen both sides of that. They can kind of put that level of empathy into their work. And I was blown away. And I mean, honestly, when I left, there was still, God, dozens, I think, of those early air crew employees at the company doing something, this, that, and the other thing too, right? But it was an amazing team that they built there. And so I did that again for about 2 years. And then there was this moment in time back in Airbnb history, if you recall, it was called the EJ incident. It was this lady, I think she was in Oakland, had rented out her apartment for a week while she was traveling at a conference or something. It's a typical Airbnb story. She had checked in, everything was great. Oh, how's everything? Oh, I love it. Your place is so nice. She gets back after the week and the place is completely ransacked.
Trashed.
It's beyond just like some beer cans in the sink or something. It's spray painted. There's like drug paraphernalia. It's like someone came in with malice and really bad intent for whatever reason. It started to get a bit of press, and it was this whole thing of, see, I told you so. This is why you don't rent your home to strangers. This is why Airbnb is a bad thing. It started to pick up steam, and there was a bit of a mismanagement by the executive team on the PR front too, right? And instead of making the story sort of just go away, they did some things that made it actually built it even further up. And so it was like people were hashtagging EJ incident on Twitter, and this thing was like becoming a massive scandal, right? And so I'm just sitting doing my support tickets and everything with my headset on in Chicago, and just like watching this almost as a third party, but like, wow, this is getting bad. It's starting to get picked up, not in just like the TechCrunch sort of tech blogs and publications, but now it's like New York Times type of that kind of visibility. And so we got a call, and Brian basically just reached out to some of the people on air crew and were like, hey, we need you in the office in San Francisco answering calls. The phones are blowing up. People are going crazy. The company's at risk, right? And so it's this pivotal moment in time. And I was like, all right, I'll be there on the next flight. And I literally booked the flight the next morning. I'm in San Francisco. They got a phone bank around the whole desks and everything. And we're answering the calls. And Brian is right there. He's like catty corner to me. I see him talking. Because hosts were now calling and saying like, is this safe? Should I do this anymore, right? And if you lose the host and the supply, then there's nothing more to book. We're back in 2008, right? And so we would be working, I kid you not, 14, 15, sometimes 18 to 20 hours a day. I remember like getting home at midnight and the alarm picking back up at 5 a.m. and I'm back in the office at 6 with the team, right? And we're like tired eyes. But the customer support team really propped up the entire company during those few weeks. And so at that point, I saw it as an opportunity where I'm like, you know what? I love this place. I love San Francisco. This energy is absolutely electric in this office. The city is like, the tech boom was
Oh, for
happening
sure.
again.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going home. I'm not going back. And so I just didn't go back. I figured out the apartment. I'm like, okay, let's get this thing sublet. Let's find a place to live here. I had some friends that were already had moved out previously from the company. And so I just got a room and I was there for the next 8 years, which is crazy. And pretty quickly after that, I got asked and tapped to lead the move out of customer support at that point back into more of a sales growth role, which is ultimately where I feel the most comfortable, and lead the North American growth strategy out of the San Francisco headquarters. And so applying some of the things they had done in Europe and kind of meeting with those people on those teams out there and understanding how that all worked.
They kicked butt and took names over there, let me tell you. They really took market share.
No, it was crazy. And it was all part of this company, Rocket Internet, and Wimdu launched over there. And they had this crazy approach. And Brian and Joe basically took this kind of like, no, we're not gonna fold to these people. We're going to war.
We're going to take over. Yeah.
And they did it. And they did amazing stuff in Europe. The teams over there, the people were amazing. I loved spending time over there and learning. And I was like, okay, how do we adapt what they did over there? It's a little bit of a different culture business wise. How do we adapt
totally.
that
I got invited over there and I went to their office and I was like, good heavens, this is who can have an office like this? How do you do this?
I know. And it was crazy. But at Airbnb, it was much more of a design engineering led culture, right? Over there, it's like sales, it's growth. It's like pick up the phone and call 100 people a day. And so it was like a complete shock when it's like, oh my God, right? And so I'm like, okay, how do I take this energy, this growth mindset, and mold it into this a little bit of a different non-sales type culture that they had currently at the company, right? And so we did a quick pilot, had 3 people that I brought over from different parts of the company, and we had success there. And they're like, okay, let's run with it. And so eventually I had about 15 internal sales account managers reaching out, calling, just literally picking up the phone, emailing, calling leads, convincing them to list on this website. It's free to list, 3% commission. Next. And then we'd have the account management team that was sitting next to them, would bring them through the setting up the account
and everything,
the listing, making sure the photos and the description and all those things were on point. And then eventually they get that first reservation and they're off. And so the growth had been accelerating and then it had tapered off a bit. And so we were able to reaccelerate just through our efforts, that growth trajectory in these North American domestic markets. Now we're talking urban individuals renting out their space, which is effectively a market that Airbnb created that didn't exist, right? The person in New York City that wants to rent out their spare bedroom for a week or 2 here or there. Like there was never a platform for that. So
like Nashville, Tennessee. I mean, you guys took all kinds of markets that didn't have, there was no market there.
Exactly. And we provided that platform and it was great that people could, on the host side, they could rent out this extra space that was being unused and they could monetize it, right? And for the traveler, it was like, wow, I can actually travel like a local, travel like a human was one of the first sort of catchphrases that they had. And you could stay in the neighborhood and have a cool coffee and go to the cool show and not have to be locked into this very tourist kind of trap area where all the hotels and you got your same kind of restaurants and you don't really get to experience the city too. So that was like this profound sea change that Airbnb was a part of. Then we did that for a few years and we started looking at these other markets and we started to get a sense of why are we not growing the same way in these vacation markets, right? And looking at a place on one side of the coast, you have like a Nantucket Martha's Vineyard, right? Which is how it all started because Brian wanted to take a trip with his family to Nantucket during the summer for a week, and there was nothing on Airbnb. And so he knocked on our door, came to our team. He's like, Justin, like, what's going on in Nantucket? I'm like, well, I don't know. I've never been. I have no idea, actually. I'm focused on Boston and these other kind of urban places, right? And so he's like, okay, well, let's take a look at it, right? And so we basically took a handful of the current team, myself and 3 others, and he wanted us to have this, he called it like the SWAT team, the parachute in, right? So he's like, just go and just figure out what's happening over there and why we're not growing. And so got a flight, us 3 took the ferry over to Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, which as I come to realize are actually 2 islands. We thought they were the same. They're completely different culture-wise and everything, right? You would never know.
Yes, exactly.
They hate each other.
They're a little bit snobby, depends to each other.
Yes. Absolutely. And so we had some strategies on things, and one thing worked in Martha's Vineyard, and one thing we were like, wow, we definitely can't do that here in Nantucket. It's that's not the time or place to start putting a bunch of like postcards door to door or something like that. So we met with current hosts. We did community meetups. We did a ton of stuff. We were there for like 2 weeks, and we quickly realized that this was a market dominated not by individuals renting out their extra space. Sure, there was a few of those, but it was a property management
That's right.
led
Totally.
market, right? And these are second homeowners that have signed the contract over to this property management company who's managing them on behalf of them. And they're not looking at Airbnb as this cool new platform. They're looking at channels to fill their dates. And
That's right.
in that market, it's extremely tight. It's Saturday to Saturday,
Yep.
June, July, and August. After
Yep.
that, no one's coming.
So they want you to fill the off season.
Yeah. So we tried to get in there on the shoulder months and try to get a sense of like, okay, well, here's what we can provide. Some places weren't even available. I mean, some people that we talked to, the family would come for 1 or 2 weeks out of the entire year, and it would just basically be empty the rest of the year, right? And so
yeah,
it's just a completely different mindset. So we quickly realized we traveled to a couple other similar markets, Orlando being the last, and specifically like the Disney kind of area, right? As a vacation, it's a bit of a hybrid because you have a lot going on in Orlando, but the vacation market there, right? Specifically the kind of Disney area, and understanding, okay, we need to play ball. This isn't us going into a market and creating it. This is a market that already exists that we need to understand what rules to play by, right? And so that was sort of the genesis for the vacation rental professional host team launching at Airbnb. Brought in a really amazing executive, Sean Stewart at JetSetter, previously the CEO there, to help lead that charge. And it was myself and 2 other individuals that were basically on the ground figuring this thing out too. And at the end of the day, look back 3 or 4 or 5 years later, we had a team of, including Hotel Tonight, over 300 or so people across engineering,
wow.
design, product, everything, and over 100, maybe 150 API connections.
Yeah, you'd
right?
have to.
And that's how we won. And that's how we took the market share from
the API connections were invaluable. Absolutely.
Because you can't, because we were asking these property management companies, it's like, okay, you have 50 homes in the Texas Gulf Coast or South Padre or some random kind of ski or sea market. And we'd say, okay, well, we'd love to have you list on Airbnb. And they'd say, okay, great. And we'd be like, okay, so first you need to, and we were playing with our old playbook. We would say, hey, first create an account, and then you go in here and you click list your space, and then you
put
add
your
photos
up and your
description. And they said, listen,
I already did that.
Yeah, I'm interested to try. I've heard about you guys. We have 100 properties across the Texas Gulf Coast. This would take a team of 5 a week, a month, a year to do, right? Like we cannot do this. And so
then you have to manage it because it changes.
And then the management stuff. So we were already asking them to do quite a bit because it wasn't integrated. And just the initial lift of adding the properties alone was just too much and too onerous for
I get it.
the majority of these property managements. If you're managing over 5 or 10 properties, you just simply don't have the time to do this. And not to mention, like you said, the management's so bad. So that's where we really started to play ball. We started to attend the VRMA shows. We started to build these integrations. And that's when you would look at one of these markets, we would be nearly 10x undersupplied compared to, at the time it was HomeAway was as part of the larger Expedia and Vrbo, but they'd have 10x our supply in some of these markets. And it was like, what the heck are we doing wrong? And so we finally caught up and now have surpassed them in a lot of places too. But it was a whole another way of thinking about short-term rentals that really wasn't around or wasn't in place at Airbnb prior to that.
And a whole other expense center. Those APIs are not cheap. And they're negotiated individually.
Yes. And we were definitely a bit judicial in terms of who we integrated with originally, right? And what partners and what PMSs we wanted to connect with. And so we took the kind of slow burn approach because we didn't want to add more complexities either. We were figuring all this out too.
Of course.
Not to mention the API costs.
And they're not even standardized. The APIs aren't standardized. The amenities aren't standardized.
No, as we know.
Well, they're more standardized now than they have been, actually. So, yeah.
Yeah. So we were back to a lot of ways. My teams were focused on growth and signing up instead of the B2C, the individual that's convincing them to rent their space on a short-term basis, as opposed to bringing in a 12-month tenant. Now it's B2B, right? Now it's working
Yeah.
with the PMS and with these property management companies locally to say, let's figure out a way to bring you on. And then that account management was so important too, to understand sort of what that share of wallet looked like between Airbnb and the other channels. Because at the end of the day, again, they didn't really care, right? Their job is to fill the dates at the highest occupancy and the highest ADR that they can
That's right.
for their owners, and they take their percentage of that.
That's still the name of the game. Hasn't
That's it.
changed.
That's it. And if they can drive as many direct bookings, that's gravy, but they understand that they need to play ball. And so Airbnb at that point had developed enough brand equity where they said, okay, we'll work with you. We'll work with your team. We'll figure it out because you guys are a major player now in the short-term rental world. But I'll be honest, it wasn't easy.
And you could bring players in from Europe. You brought players in from Europe, and there were pieces that they could add that you couldn't get, like for Vrbo for the most part at the time, or Vacation, whatever, Expedia at the time.
Yeah, there was a lot. We took a global lens for sure, which I think was also smart too, because this idea has existed for way beyond and before Airbnb, right? The idea of renting out your second home was around when Vrbo was doing paid ads and classifieds, right? The back of the paper, right? He's like, oh, beach house, 2-bedroom available, $800 a week. It's like, oh, okay, cool. So this concept wasn't anything new. So it would, I think we were a bit, as a company, maybe arrogant initially going in and trying to say, no, we're Airbnb. We're this amazing super brand. You need to apply and play by our rules. And they said, no, actually, we don't. Right. And so this is where I came into those offices, right? Going into market and talking to people and these towns, right? These small beach towns. And there's this property management company, XYZ, local property managers, right? And I'd just go and knock on the door and we'd figure it out. And they're bring in their 10 or 20 homes that they were managing and just keep going down the list.
This episode of How We Grow is sponsored by RevMax, the premier full-service revenue management system. Built for vacation rental managers who are looking for a market edge, RevMax offers data-driven tools and services that will increase revenue and drive more profit. Connect with their revenue management experts at getrevmax.com and discover their full-service revenue management solution.
Let me ask you something. Recently, last year, there was litigation that affected third-party OTAs from property managers who got involved and said, hey, we need to be the merchant of record. And they did because of the contracts they had with their property managers, and the state got involved. Tell me your thoughts. Where's that going to go? How's that going to play?
I mean, I think ultimately the local towns and municipalities understand, especially in these vacation markets, how important tourism is, right?
Yeah.
So they're not trying to bite the hand that feeds them in that sense. I think that was an issue. We ran into the merchant of record issue. I think Carolina, right, is a big, has a lot.
Carolina and Alabama.
In Alabama, yes, exactly. Were two markets that I was working very closely with. And so there was a lot of regulatory work that we had to do with kind of the legal regulation team, right, at Airbnb that I had to work with adjacently. We had to figure out some things, and there's the escrow requirement, right? And so there was a lot of supply that we were unable to acquire in the early days because we just didn't have those pieces in place. And at the end of the day, they said, well, if we're not the merchant of record and we can't keep these funds in escrow, it's required by law, right? And we can't work with you in your platform. And so it's just another one of those things where Airbnb has to fall on their sword a bit and say, like, okay, we'll figure out something that makes sure that you're still
Merchant of record, but we have this control over whatever. Yeah, they'll figure out something. I don't know what they're figured out. I should probably call my friends involved in that firsthand and figure out how that is. I didn't know if you knew.
No, it's still always, and these things are a moving target too, right? And you're seeing that in New York City, right? As a huge, massive market, and they came with some sweeping regulations, which we've been fighting that since literally my very first day in 2010. It's always been something in New York City that they're, for whatever reason, right? And I think you're seeing that too. I think Airbnb has done a really masterful job of applying the collect and remit kind of optionality on the listings that then when you're the tax collector, you're that local legislator, that local municipality leader, and you start to get this yearly tax check, right? you start to take the things that they're saying a bit more seriously, right? And I think that's been a massive win for the company, for Airbnb, where they're mass markets, urban markets, vacation markets, small, rural, off the map towns. They're doing automatic collect and remit and saying, okay, great, here's your check, right, for the taxes that we've collected in the last year. And from a regulatory standpoint, you don't want to turn that down, right? So you start to do the things and say, okay, let's work with you, Airbnb, as a partner to us, a partner to our tourism industry here. So yeah, I think they're at this point a little bit too big to fail in a lot of markets. It's just a matter of ironing these things out, and they take time.
Time, litigation, attorneys, and people to talk.
That's it. Yeah. So pay the money, take the time, do the things, but it'll all work out, I think, in the end.
Tell me this, when you go to conferences or if you go to places where there are property managers, what's the biggest question you get?
I think when I'd be representing Airbnb and we'd have our booth at Verma, a lot of them were looking for us to be that all-in-one sort of platform, right? I think it goes back to the problems that they're all trying to solve with all this complexity and all these softwares and all these things. And a lot of times they'd be like, I would love it if I could just list all my places on Airbnb. If you guys had the tools, right, built into the product that I would be paying for already.
Exactly.
Give you guys a commission and make it as easy as possible for me and still fill my nights. That's like the holy grail, right? And I think this is quite a few years away, but there's a ton of talk internally about building our own PMS, right? And bolting that onto a sort of Airbnb Pro platform, which would be a different set of rules and everything, but it would be much more applicable to the vacation rental industry. So when I would mention these things, so it was always like, yes, we're thinking about it. Yes, we're looking at it. Yes, we hear you, right? But they never, for whatever reason, fully dove in.
They never pulled the trigger on that, which would have been smart. That would have been really smart. But but look at this. Let's take the Expedia model and what they did and the successes they had and the failures they had for that. When you think about the PMSs that they acquired, I think there are lessons to be learned. But here's the other thing. I think that there's a lot of new technology coming out soon. I think in the next year, the next 18 months, we're going to see a ton of new technology that's going to change the way that we do business. And so I think that if Airbnb wants an all-in-one platform, they should pay attention to some things that are happening really quickly in this space.
I agree. And I think you run the risk of, I mean, like any big company, right? You start as a small guy, right? The David Goliath, and now you're the major player in the game. But that's how it works in businesses. Eventually, the king of the hill gets knocked back down and a new upstart comes in.
That's
right.
True.
And if you can provide better service, better quality, a lower rate, lower commission, lower price, then ultimately that's where the consumers are.
Or additional functionality that saves you money, which is where that's at. That really is additional functionality. We're not looking to get rid of people by new functionality. We're looking to add productivity so that our people can do more to help our customers. That's really what the game is in most businesses. So that's really exciting. Is there any advice or anything you'd like to share with other property managers? I want to give you time to share something.
No, I've done the hosting myself, right? And I've worked with property managers. I've seen the full spectrum, right, of accommodations providers. And I think my advice goes back to make things easier, not harder, right? Because at the end of the day, you're turning these places over, you're providing the services that are required by the owners that's often out of market, right? Don't overcomplicate things. And I think that's when the stress really comes and becomes a bit overwhelming, is when you try to do too much and have too many products and have too many technologies and this and that and growth, right? They're always trying to figure out, well, how do I get more homes under contract, right? That's at the end of the day, that's
for sure. I'm going to shock you with something. You have to hear this. I had someone tell me last year, they were doing some new things in their company, their property management company, and they were no longer going to support their guest after 8 o'clock. It was just too much work for them. And I was like, I'm rarely speechless. I talk all the time, but that got me. And I was like, how is that going to work? If that works for you, good for you. If you can get away with not supporting, now, not catastrophic things. I mean, most of us have a line, but
No, and I think that's the mindset is like, okay, we need to get more properties and we need to try to squeeze as much out of these owners that we can and the guests that we're servicing. But I think there has to be almost an opposite mindset of saying, let's do more with less. And by doing that, the growth will be natural, right? And you'll naturally acquire more guests, more owners will sign up, right? Because if you try to string you and your team too thin on these things, you're going to have churn. Your guests aren't going to be rebooking the next year, right? And so you're almost going to have this kind of failure by process. And you alone, as the head of the property management company, you're completely burnt out at the end of this.
A lot of the people that do that they totally get burned out.
It's tough. It's such a tough life. The margins are so thin in this industry that it's like you really need to prioritize your life and figure out a way that you can still provide this quality of service that ultimately can build your own local brand without sacrificing quality of life at the end of the day, right?
Tell me your favorite guest or owner story.
So there was a lady that we met. I'm blanking on her name. In Savannah, Georgia, which is one of the markets that it's a hybrid urban business, on-friends, vacation market, right? And you have the beach relatively close out there. And so we spent about a month out there building up the supply and the host community. And there was this lady, and I can picture her face. We had a booth at the First Friday Art Walk in Savannah, Georgia. And people were completely confused. Like, Airbnb, I thought you guys were like a hotel company. Like, what do you guys like at this? You guys sell art now? And we had art from some of our hosts.
Oh, how cute. That's a great idea.
We thought it was fun. It was so cheap. It was like $50 for the booth. And we're handing out cards. We're talking to people about it, right? And we ended 3 or 4 hours there. And we were like, yeah, it was okay. It wasn't really, I wouldn't call it a success, right? And we looked back when we got back to the office, right, a few weeks later, and we were going through all of our notes and all of our leads and everything and following up. And we were like, oh, what about blank person at the art walk, right? She said her son had just moved out to college. And she's like, I have his spare bedroom. It's so nice. It's upstairs. It's got like its own private entry. She's like, this would be perfect. We're like, you would be great. We left it at that though, right? We came back a month or two later. She had already made like $10,000 or $15,000.
Oh my gosh.
Renting out just as like this bedroom was going for like 150 nights. It was like book solid. She had like redone it. And we gave her a call and she's like, Airbnb, I love you guys. I had no idea. I'm making all this money. I love doing this. Like, I'm meeting amazing people around the world. I'm actually renovating my garage into accommodations now, right? And I'll do that. And so we look back, come on, that she had made like at the end of the year like 50 grand and had become this like crazy amazing story of like this platform. And that's with sales and everything. And it's like, oh, how many listings
changed her life. It may have been a good sale, but it did. It changed her life.
And that was it. And when you take something like that away, it's like, wow, we had a profound impact on this lady's life from our brief 10-minute interaction.
That was a brilliant idea. I love that artwork.
Thank you.
That was a brilliant idea.
Well, we were trying to figure out how do we get in front of a bunch of local people and let them know that this platform exists and they can rent it out. And it's like our budgets were so thin at that point that it was like, what are we going to do? Right. And so that was one of the ideas.
And is it when it went public? I mean, how did that feel?
Oh, it was sort of I don't want to call it the culmination of everything, but
that's what I was thinking.
What was the coolest part about it, though, was that the company did an amazing job. They had like a live stream, like Zoom, and people could just like plug into where they had like the office and like our community culture people that were sort of like just doing fun, like just, oh, we're going live with so-and-so they were with us for 5 years back in 2012. They're like, hey, how's everything going? Like, oh, it's cool. Like they're in Germany and they're just talking about what they do and they have a family now. And they would do like a 10-minute little blurb with them. Then they do like a little fun event or something. And I had a group call with like 4 or 5 of our like old former employees and people that I'm still very close with and stuff. And it was just like the company did such an amazing job of building this internal culture that I think you really, if you weren't part of it, it's so hard to understand. Truly, truly appreciated the people that worked for the company and all the way to the top to Brian. to the way that he handled the COVID layoffs and things like that too. I mean, the guy genuinely cares. I don't think you can say that about probably 90 to 95% of CEOs, especially at big companies. Like we get burn and churn and we don't give a crap about you, right? And they really do. And that was in full display that day. And it was so fun. And I remember Brian was on, I think like a CNBC, right? And it was going to go at, I think, open at $60 something. And then they said, oh, it's actually opening at like so-and-so $100 something. And he had this, like, it wasn't even greediness. He was just like so wowed by it. And it was the first he had heard of it. And he was like, wow, like, okay, people want to be a part of this, even as shareholders and buyers of the equity itself. And it's like, people really, truly appreciate what me and what this massive team have been able to build over the last dozen years or so. And to see that was great. I'm still close with Brian, which is cool, right? He's a billionaire now.
Isn't that crazy when you think of where you end up? And Justin, you're still doing property management. Think about that. Not only you really grew your teeth in this industry, and then even today, you're like loving what you do and you're doing property management still, but for these really cool properties.
And honestly, Lynell, it's the same exact thing. You have these owners and these hosts and these people with this amazing property that want to share it with the world, right? Make a little extra money to help cover their costs, their exorbitant costs of maintaining these castles. I will say it's a bit more than your typical like 2-bedroom beach house. Connecting them with these travelers, these people that want to have this
experience,
experience that you cannot replicate anywhere else. Now you're not living like a local. Now you're living like a royal.
Exactly. You're the second person I've interviewed that really like high end. Well, actually, a bunch of people do high end. But when you talk about castles, and it just blows me away. When you talked about the Druid caves, I was like, what?
No.
Are you serious? I've been
know.
in some of those things, like some of the trips that I've taken, because I love to hike. And some of the trips that I've taken, I've gone into caves where they do have the pictographs. I think they're called pictographs. I don't remember what they are. But they're just like amazing. I've been in Rome in those caves and they have those there, and wow.
Yeah, so that's in the Dordogne region of France, and it's bookable through Storied Collection too. So yeah, if anyone has a question or a desire to travel, and like I said at the top, it's really, these places are amazing and definitely very high end. But when you do the math and you break it down to the 10, 15 bedrooms and you bring 2 or 3 families in, the price per room is actually, right on par with your typical $200, $300 hotel room that you book anywhere in the world, right? And so it's like, I think that was the gap that we're trying to fill here from an awareness perspective, is saying like, you see these things on Bridgerton or on these shows or the royal family, and you're like, oh my, I would love to experience that, just even if just for one night. And through our platform, you're able to do that. So
I have a bucket list. Mine's Versailles. When I went, they couldn't stay there. That's my bucket list. It's really expensive, but it's still my bucket list.
Yeah, no, that's right up there too.
Our company ever goes public, I'll go do that.
There you go.
Justin, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And I really appreciate you doing part 2. I know it's a long interview. I don't do long interviews. Like in the whole time that I've been doing this is almost 2 years. I think I may have done 3 or 4, but it's just that I get carried away with interest. So I appreciate you. I was so honored to have you, and I'm really grateful that you took the time. That's quite a story. And I think that people will be interested in the trip, because it's like, you're still doing property management. You're still doing vacation rentals. That's it. It's a tale as old as time at the end of the day, right? So thanks, Lynell. Thanks for having me. I really had fun. This episode of How We Grow was brought to you by RevMax. To find out more about how RevMax can help to grow your vacation rental business, visit getrevmax.com. Make sure to search for How We Grow in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. On behalf of the team here at Inhabit, thanks for listening.